Okay, good morning. Well, I think we'll start. This event is part of the process of welcoming new students to the Bartlett School of Planning at UCL. It's a slight departure from what we have done in past years, because in past years we ended up the week by getting somebody from the London Plan team working for the Mayor of London at City Hall to give us a talk about the London Plan and the London planning and government process. It turns out that this year, the entire London Plan team, which is only about 12 or 15 people, but all of them are going off today for an away day. So none of them is available to speak to us. But since nothing very much has changed since last year, I got them to agree that we could instead use slides they had prepared last year and talk over their slides as a way of introducing the plan. And then what I've done is to invite 5 or 6 academic and community people to come as panelists to start our discussion off by posing each of them 1 or 2 key questions about the plan and the planning process. So that's the proposal for today. We are recording the event, so if you want to be incognito, you better change your name on the screen and switch your camera off, but it's basically seen as a public event with public discussion. So I'm going to do that now, and then at about 10:55, 11, introduce the panelists, and then we'll have an open discussion for half an hour or so when they've finished. Okay, so this initial set of slides was prepared a year ago by a man called Rob McNichol, who was the manager of the London Plan process at City Hall. He's now moved away, he's working at City of London Corporation. And Nina Miles is now the manager of the London Plan team. It starts off, and I'm trying to talk about this as though I was the GLA, as though I were him. I'm trying to restrain myself with great difficulty from making comments as we go along. So here, this is how the GLA has chosen to introduce the subject, introduce London as the capital city of the UK and as the seat of monarchy, government, major institutions, international businesses, and cultural organizations, with about 9 million residents within its administrative area. The map showing the administrative area of London in red, which has an area of about 1,500 square kilometers. And I must say, it is a distinctive thing about London compared with many other capital cities that it is extremely dominant in the country compared with other cities. And if you look at the rank size distribution of cities in Britain, Greater London, even though it's underbounded, even though its boundary is very tight around it, is vastly bigger than 2nd, 3rd, 4th cities, and that is rather distinctive. Not unique, but distinctive. History here is very minimal, but I think we need to say to everybody, especially people who are new to the UK, that this city is a couple of 1,000 years old, essentially. There has been settlement here, not quite continuously, but almost, since around the year 0. And that crucial in that early settlement, and ever since, till about 200 years ago, has been the River Thames. The River Thames, which is navigable, always was navigable, which connects this location with the oceans, with the rest of Europe, and later with the empire and colonies, and facilitated this enormous expansion of the English regime to cover these enormous colonies and to introduce and operate this slave-based production system in the Caribbean and the Americas. And in the middle of this map, you can see some of these docks which were built in London in the early 19th century, late 18th century up here, and mid 19th century here, which were built using capital that had accumulated through this slave-based trading system, with the operation of the docks being very much managed as part of the slave-based economy of trade with Africa and the Caribbean. And indeed, University College is linked with all that, but that's another story. The population of this city grew rather steadily to the mid-19th century. 1850, here it is, by then reaching 2 million, and then accelerated extremely fast in the late 19th century. It's a period in which railways were expanding, the city was expanding, the empire was expanding, the port was being modernized with these enclosed docks, and the population raced ahead through the rest of the 19th century, in the 20th century, through till the outbreak of the Second World War. 1939 is the key date at which basically London's growth stopped. And in the years following World War II, the population of London fell, partly because of just the demolition and damage of building stock, but partly also through the planned migration of citizens to other regions and other parts of the Southeast region, including some migration to new towns, but also to just other settlements. So this was a period of population decline, industrial decline, and generally shrinkage, if you like, of the city, which went into reverse in the mid-1980s and began to grow again. And that growth has continued since the mid-1980s and looks like it could continue further from now. The governance of this city was kind of modernized in the 1880s with the establishment of the Greater London Council, of the London County Council. This was a big and powerful organization with major responsibilities, running sewage networks and water and public utilities, and with powers to build housing, which was a tremendous innovation, and running an education system. It absorbed the school boards and built itself this very grand, imposing county hall building in the early 20th century on the River Thames. Its housing production was enormously important. It built housing within the London boundary, but also beyond. Here is some typical early council housing built by the LCC, and then some later ones. This enormous estate on the right is the Becontree estate in Dagenham, which was built alongside the new Ford motor car works at Dagenham between the First and Second World Wars. The picture on the left is a slightly naughty inclusion because that's really a private sector project of building speculative housing for sale along the metro lines northwest of London. We're then hit by World War II, and that caused enormous damage in London. There were major bombing attacks by the Nazi forces, and you can see on the left here a picture of the land around St. Paul's Cathedral, cleared in enormous bomb damage to the north and west of the cathedral on land which later became the Barbican development. And on the right, it will an extract from the map showing bomb damaged areas of London. During World War II, London began to lay the foundation, no, that's the wrong term, began to prepare for post-war reconstruction, and commissioned, the LCC commissioned a master plan for London from their architect, Mr. Forshaw, working alongside our UCL professor, Patrick Abercrombie, and they produced in 1943 the County of London Plan, which is shown in miniature here on the left. I mean, it was a plan of the kind very conventional at that time. It viewed the city as a collection of neighborhoods divided up by and partitioned by a major road system. Motor cars have become very important and were expected to grow in usage, and the city needed to be restructured to accommodate motor cars and trucks and stuff. And you can see a series of concentric rings of highways, and the space between has some centers, central functions in it, but is generally speaking planned to be either residential areas or industrial areas, or as in the red, port areas. So it is rather a segregation of uses, though it's not a zoning plan in the sense that would be understood in North America or most of Europe. It doesn't actually specify how every single plot of land must be used. And part of its provisions was a very interesting idea of building a kind of cultural centre on the south bank of the River Thames, facing the historic centre on the north bank. And that idea was picked up and very much implemented in the 1951 Festival of Britain, which was a tremendous demonstration of modernism and kind of post-war optimism and so on, and really set the atmosphere for a whole generation of people, including me. One of my first memories of coming to London was going to see the Festival of Britain, and here, surviving still to this day, is the Royal Festival Hall, one of London's best public buildings. A fantastic place where those of you who are going on a cruise this afternoon will probably end up here and might like to explore it. But the London County Council governed an area which is shown here in green, which we now refer to as Inner London. And that continued until 1965, when a reform created a new boundary of something called Greater London, with the council, the GLC, Greater London Council, which is shown here. And within it, 33 newly constituted boroughs. So it's a two-tier government system, which operated from 1965 onwards, but was then abolished in 1985. The upper tier, the London-wide body, was abolished by the government led by Margaret Thatcher. So for 15 years, from 85 till the end of the century, London basically had no metropolitan government at all. And decisions were made by the 33 individual boroughs with some quite strong influence from the national government, the central government, which in England has always been very much given to engaging in controlling what happens in localities. Starting in 2000, London has a new government system which elects directly a mayor of London. That's how it works. And the power of the new government is concentrated in the hands of one person, the mayor of London. So when you elect the mayor of London, you elect him or her with all their bundle of policies and stuff. And there have been 3 so far. Each of them have served for 2 4-year terms. Ken Livingstone first for 8 years, then Boris Johnson, later the Prime Minister, for 8 years, and now Sadiq Khan, who's in the middle of his 2nd term of office. And the next election of the mayor will be in 2024. I have to intervene at this point in the GLA slideshow because there's a very interesting omission in it. They didn't mention anywhere the existence of the London Assembly. So I'll just quickly explain that the law which created the GLA in the person of the mayor also created alongside that an assembly of 25 people. The assembly has really no power. It's not a parliament in any ordinary sense. Its job is to, quote, scrutinize what the mayor is doing. That's what it does. Its only real power is it has power to ratify certain senior appointments, and it has the requirement once a year to approve the mayor's budget. And that does give it some leverage, and occasionally it's used it to influence the mayor's policies. But basically it sits on the sidelines commenting on what the mayor is doing. The main function of the mayor is to prepare strategies for all these things. And these strategies are meant to be bound together, to be linked, to be synthesized in one of these strategies called the London Plan. And the London Plan also serves the purpose of being a document in the town and country planning system, part of the process of regulating how urban development is permitted or not permitted. Well, the GLA has put in here some slides to illustrate some of the issues which are affecting London. And they put in, first and foremost, the enormous inequalities which London suffers. Some of the richest and some of the poorest people in the UK are to be found here in London, with some appalling housing conditions suffered by people at the bottom end of the income scale, and serious housing affordability problems right through the housing system. I mean, for professionals and middle-class people, as well as low-income people, a lot of unemployment, and enormous health disparities, really huge health disparities. There's a 13-year difference in the healthy life expectancy of people in different boroughs, in the extreme cases, between the richest boroughs, which are in Central West, Kensington and Westminster, and the poorest, which are Newham and Dagenham in the east. This chart is simply amplifying a bit about housing on the left, showing for people wanting to become owner-occupiers of housing, to buy their own homes. This is the amount of money they have to put down. They have to save up, produce, or inherit this much money in order to be able to buy a house with a mortgage loan. And that, as you can see, is £150,000, which is really a very large amount in London, and that's 2 or 3 times what it would be in England on average. I mean, the average price of a house in London is something like 13 or 14 or 15 times the average London salary. So it is a very big affordability problem for house purchase. But of course, house purchase is only less than half the population. Most people are renting, either in social rent, which is a shrinking part of the total, or in the open market for rentals. And this green line on the right-hand chart is showing what's happened to private rentals over the last 15 years or so. And you can see that it's gone up, and that the affordability, because wages, of course, have risen a bit too, the affordability has gone steadily down. And that situation is getting worse. I mean, rents are continuing to grow. There's enormous stresses in the housing market. Finally, the GLA has chosen to list some other issues affecting London: the climate emergency, of course, poor air quality, which is a very serious problem, and also added COVID-19. I think that's a bit naughty because COVID-19 hadn't hit us when the London Plan was being prepared, but it certainly has now. And finally here, the median household wealth by region, which is really showing how in London, it's been white people who've enjoyed enormous increases of wealth in recent years. and that other ethnic groups have scarcely participated in that growth of wealth at all in London. In the rest of the UK and other regions, they have. So the issues, the challenges which planners face in making a plan are listed here. The urban form issues, the problems of how much suburban intensification to do. London traditionally has rather low density suburbs, and there's big tensions about how much to intensify that and how to do it, and whether to expand London onto its green belt surrounding the edge of the built-up area. Second challenge has been the tension between using land for housing and using land for industrial use and employment, which has swung very much in favour of far more land has been diverted to housing than the plans ever intended. Problems of funding for social infrastructure and affordable housing, in which London was very dependent on national government money for this. And that was not so bad when there were Labour administrations in London and nationally, but it's become extremely severe in recent years, with the national government very averse to social housing. Congestion a problem both in the road system and in public transport, and problems of displacement of cultural and social uses by real estate market pressures. And what mayors have done in successive plans have been to invest so far as they can in affordable housing, to identify new capacity for building homes, new spaces on which housing can be built by displacing and demolishing other uses, tackling air pollution through an ultra-low emission zone, trying to encourage more of us to use healthy transport modes and public transport rather than private transport, and investing, getting national government money to invest in major railway network improvements. This map is showing the latest addition to the rail network, Crossrail 1, now called the Elizabeth line, which is now more or less open. Very long delayed, overran its costs and budget. Basically what it is a newly tunneled railway through the centre of London, linking long-haul suburban railways out in the east and long-haul suburban railways out in the west, with a connection to Heathrow Airport and a link up here with southeast London networks. So this really achieves two things. It allows for far more inward commuting from distant places, creates much more capacity for long-haul commuting, and it adds a lot of capacity for east-west travel through the centre of London and relieves congestion on other parts of the underground network. And there are plans in the latest London plan for another railway like that running north-south. So the London plan, which we now live with, which was published in 2021, as I said earlier, it forms part of what we call in England, in Britain, the development plan. If anybody wants to develop a building or change the use of a building or land in Britain, they have to apply for permission. There's no automatic entitlement to develop. And the permission is decided by a planning authority, which normally has to decide on the basis of the development plan. The development plan is meant to be the main criterion for decision. There are some exceptions, and the present national government has added to the number of exceptions, so there are quite a lot of changes now that people can make without needing permission. And Ben Clifford, who's one of our professors here at the School of Planning, has done a lot of very good research about that, and if he's here, he may comment later on. But that's produced some very bizarre and problematic housing units converted from office buildings to a very low standard, adding to the housing stock at the very bottom end of what's acceptable. In London, most development projects are decided by the local London borough. But if a scheme is large or meets various other criteria, it can be referred as well to the Mayor of London, to City Hall, and the Mayor looks at it and then can decide to take the decision over, give permission himself, refuse permission himself, or declare himself happy with the scheme to be decided locally. This is just mapping the relationship of all these bits of the development plan, comprises the London plan, local plans, and in a few places, neighbourhood plans for small localities. So here we are with this plan. It's a very growth-oriented plan, trying to accommodate this trend growth of population and employment, and trying to do it within the existing built-up area, trying to do it within this white area on the map, not trespassing into the green belt or outside the London boundary, which is the red bit. There remains, of course, an enormous amount of commuting across the boundary, something like 900,000 people a day traveling into that white area from surrounding districts and counties. This is giving you an impression of those areas which are basically functionally part of the London labour supply. This is a summary diagram of the plan itself, and its main instrument for implementation really is these purple bits. These are called opportunity areas, and the opportunity areas are the areas defined in the plan as the places where most of the major developments of housing, employment, and other things will take place. It's a very controversial issue. We can talk about it more perhaps later on, but there are now 47 of these areas. Also on the map is the Crossrail, which I spoke about already, going from west to east, and the proposed Crossrail 2, which is this one going from Cambridge and Stansted Airport in the north, through Tottenham and North London, through the centre, and out to the southwest, hooking up with all the Surrey and southwest London commuter lines. Also shown on here in yellow is the high-speed railway HS2 that's now under construction at great expense, which joins Birmingham up here to London, with a station at Old Oak Common, which we may hear more about in a few minutes, and into Euston Station here by University College in the centre. Very expensive, very disruptive, very controversial. The plan, the London plan, commits itself to what it calls good growth. It has these 6 fundamental objectives in the beginning of the plan. In the draft plan, they were called policies, which would, in the English system, give them more authority and weight. But there were a lot of protests from development interests about that, because these good growth statements contain most of the sort of progressive redistributive aspects of what's in the plan, but they were downgraded to being called objectives. And I should apologize here, because this is me making a comment, a judgmental comment on it, which I probably shouldn't do. There are 100 or more policies in this plan. It's a big fat document. It has a lot in it on design. It places great emphasis on the role of design considerations in making this process of densification and intensification acceptable, and so on. That itself is a very controversial kind of issue. Here are some key numerical features of the plan, which I won't dwell on because I've referred to quite a lot of these things already. But in a way, the central dynamic of the plan is getting more housing built. And that really is the crucial thing about it. And there are some figures just here on that. I mean, the left-hand diagram here is about the amounts of council housing, that is housing owned and built by municipalities, which was enormously important in earlier decades, but was still quite substantial in the 1980s, but became almost flat by the end of the 1980s, and so virtually none got built all through the rest of the century. And then it began to pick up a bit in the beginning of the 21st century. And this is slightly differently defined data, is rather stronger now, but still only 2,000 or 3,000 dwellings a year. So it's a tiny amount of social housing being built. And offset against these new construction of social housing, there have been substantial losses of social housing in various ways. On the right-hand chart is data on the proportion of all new housing built in London which is deemed affordable. This word is a very slippery term. It was given a legal standing, this word, by the government of Britain, the national government of 2010, which said that housing could be called affordable if it was sold or rented at less than 80%, 80% of the prevailing market price. So in London, a lot of that so-called affordable housing is extremely expensive and out of the reach of most Londoners. The Mayor of London's plan has a target that 50% of all new homes should be, in this sense, affordable, and has achieved percentages of between 20 and occasionally as much as 40% in the big applications which come to the Mayor's notice. This, I think, is the key diagram. It's showing the amount of housing completions in London. And you can see from it that the red, the pink, which is provision for the open market to sell or rent open market prices, is overwhelmingly the dominant form of housing production, even though the policy and the research indicates that it's this social rent and affordable rent which is most needed. So the backlogs of unmet need are very serious. Now I'm going to stop it a minute because the slideshow from GLA ends in a moment. It ends with some slides about how the London Plan of 2021 might connect with the COVID-19 issues. There are two slides here, which I'll finish with. First is that the London Plan tackles some of the relevant issues, many of the relevant issues revealed by the pandemic, problems of space in homes by setting floor space standards and green space and access standards, protecting some cultural spaces, creating space for the logistics industry, the delivery system, making enough space so that all these home deliveries, which have grown so fast during the pandemic, can be accommodated, supporting central London and high streets, because central London has been so very strongly affected by people working at home and the closure for a long time of cultural activities, restaurants and so on, so that businesses in central London have had an extremely hard time, and landlords and property interests in central London have been very desperate about whether they will ever regain high valuations of their central London property. The Mayor also has got 9 recovery missions in his ideas about what to do about the situation, the post-COVID recovery situation. And Rob McNichol, putting this slideshow together, made this interesting Venn diagram, which I think any of you might like to just take away with you and look at when this slideshow is going up on your Moodle page, you can see that the overlap, here are the things which are regarded as important for COVID recovery. This circle includes some things which are also part of dealing with the climate emergency, and some things which link with the housing crisis, but most of the housing crisis issues are outside that circle. So the Mayor of London is seeing housing as not really part of the problems posed by the COVID problem. Well, I'm running a bit late. I've slightly talked too slowly. I'm going to very quickly now, before handing over to our panel, I'm going to say something about what for us at UCL has been enormously valuable cooperation between us, the School of Planning and other parts of UCL, and a network of community organisations in London called Just Space. This was formed in the early part of the 21st century by community groups, activist groups, beginning to get to grips with this new government system in London and the existence of the London Plan, and meeting each other, finding that we were making similar arguments and similar campaigns, but without coordination. So it was set up, Just Space was set up as a kind of very minimally structured cooperation network, linking citizen groups, which are mostly unfunded, minimally funded groups of local people. It includes a few large organizations, which are kind of NGOs with large staff bodies like Friends of the Earth and cycling campaigns, but on the whole, it's local small groups. And it works at local levels, at borough levels, and at the GLA scale, and now a bit beyond outside London. And it has very productive relations with many staff and students at universities, especially UCL, I think, which influences research. Very valuable influence, I think, on the research that we do in the university, on teaching, and on perhaps producing future generations of planners who are more attuned to the needs of communities and how to engage successfully with them. In 2016, Just Space prepared a kind of alternative plan for London, having had 10 years experience, very frustrating experience of dealing with plans generated by the mayor or the boroughs and just reacting. The community groups decided to prepare a plan of their own and spent 2 years in workshops and conferences producing such a plan. And there it is, you can find it online. And that formed the basis for lobbying the new Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, about what should be in his London plan, and then making representations about the draft when it appeared, to rather little effect. There were some gains, but on the whole, it was rather little effect. Now, in the most recent period, this last couple of years, there has been this very interesting experiment in which the Just Space Network, unable to have meetings because of the pandemic, produced something called the Community-Led Recovery Plan for London, which I do suggest everybody looks at. It's a free download from the website at this link. And it was done with enormous amount of student support through having a large number of small Zoom meetings designed in such a way to be welcoming for people who weren't used to using the internet, didn't have all that middle-class familiarity with office software and using computers and the internet, or maybe needed some support in doing that. The students played a very important role in preparing these small meetings by digesting the written and spoken statements of participants in advance of the meeting, preparing briefing documents which everybody could read before the meeting, so people would all start with a shared pool of information and knowledge about the topic, and then helping to make the notes from the meetings and help us to synthesize those notes into proposals and policies And that led to a further round of Zoom meetings at which the emphasis was on ranking and prioritizing key issues as against less key issues, and producing this document, which finally has surfaced and is really a very interesting document. I'm not going to say much about it because I think others may say more later on, but it is an interesting challenge to the official line on how we should be planning after the pandemic. Just got two slides which refer to it a bit. It's got 40 or so policy proposals, but they can be grouped into four dominant themes, imperatives, and here they are. The first two are, first of all, a caring city. And this word caring has both a narrow and a wide sense. It has a narrow sense that we're very, very concerned. People in London are very concerned about the lack of concern shown to people who work in caring professions and jobs, whether it's in the National Health Service or old people's care homes or caring for sick people in other contexts, many of them unpaid, most of them women, a great majority of them from various minoritized ethnic groups, some indeed here without sort of authorization, without papers, without the right immigration status and visas, and are hounded by the government's approach to trying to create hostile conditions for migrants. So there's a big push in this document to rethink the standing and status of these workers and make sure they're paid better because they're so crucial, but also to apply this idea of caring more widely to these larger groups of workers who can't sit and work at home in their drawing rooms, but have to go to work. They're delivering stuff, they're running the retail system, they're running the transport network. And all of those people have tended to suffer extremely disproportionately from disease and death during the COVID pandemic. But that this concept of caring would extend also to the building stock, that we need to care for the building stock, look after it, recycle it where we can rather than demolish it as part of caring for the climate and environment. So that's the first thing. Second imperative is about visibility and influence. That I think many people in London have felt that the decisions in London are taken by effectively business interests, very strongly articulated real estate and financial sector interests, and that the needs of citizens, especially low and middle income citizens, don't get much of a look in. And coinciding with the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a big emphasis in Your Space on being very explicit about the need for all voices to be heard, and more voices, particularly minoritized and working class voices, to be given more say in the way London works. And finally, the third and fourth of these imperatives. The third one is about locality. It's about the importance of locality and reinforcing a policy that Just Space has been pursuing for a long time, which is the idea of lifetime neighborhoods. That neighborhoods should, so far as possible, be places where people can meet as many of their needs as possible, whether they're small children or the parents of small children, or whether they're working age adults or whether they're old, getting old. Should be possible, if you want, within these neighborhoods to meet your needs, to find alternative housing when your needs change, and so on, without doing unnecessary amounts of travel, especially travel by car. So this is a very strong statement, not so controversial as some of the other things. And finally, a priority for climate and nature. The crisis is not just a climate crisis, it's a crisis of biodiversity and food production. And there are all sorts of initiatives going on all over London from the bottom up about what to do about these things, and that they need to be very powerful in making the plans. I'll leave this here for a moment, because what we're going to do now is that I'm going to introduce our panel of guests and ask each of these guests to speak to us for maximum 5 minutes, but it could be less, introducing one idea or one or two ideas, very few things which they want to suggest we put into the discussion to make this session on London plans and London planning and what comes next more productive. And as I said before, this PDF, this set of slides, will be on your Moodle page by Monday, and you can take all this and follow its links and so on freely and make connections. And also at the end of it is a slide about what you can do to connect, if you want to our various activities with Just Space in terms of volunteering and joining in with Just Space activity. So can I go back to the beginning, to that list of our guests, and very briefly introduce them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, because some of them may wish to share their screens, or at least we want to see their faces. So can I ask Jessica Ferm, first of all, to just wave her hand, as it were, and identify herself. This is Jessica Ferm. She's a professor in the School of Planning. Her specialization has been very strongly in industry and workplaces, local economies, and the tensions in planning between workspace and housing space. And she's given evidence to the GLA and helped Just Space with work on these tensions about workspace and so on. I've now lost sight of my sequence. Yes, could I ask Jenny Robinson if she's here to come in next? And here we are. Jennifer Robinson. She's a great collaborator from the UCL Department of Geography. She does a lot of work internationally in urban geography and governance and stuff, and she's worked a lot with Just Space, particularly in Old Oak Common and Park Royal, where she and Katya Atuya have done really important work with Just Space and other local groups on, well, she'll explain when we get to her, but I'm sure she'll say something about it. It's been an enormous value to us. Pablo, can you wave? This is Pablo Sendra, who's a staff member in the School of Planning, done a lot of work with Just Space, particularly with groups of students working in support of community groups in Kilburn in northwest London, and on the Alton estate in Wandsworth in southwest London. And I think he's going to say something about all that. Fourthly, of the people here in the School of Planning is Myfanwy Taylor. Myfanwy, can you give us a wave? Myfanwy did a very wonderful PhD here, really looking at the hidden economies of London, the economies of particularly ethnic minority groups and informal groups, and the way in which the interests of the very formal institutional corporate economy dominate what happens in London, and the potential for a stronger voice for unpaid workers and marginal workers and so on. I hope she's going to say a bit about that. She's now back here after being away on another project. She's here as a research fellow, and that's wonderful to have her back. And then we've got two guests from the Just Space network. Lucy Rogers, who I can see, Hi, Lucy. Lucy is an illustrator, works in East London, is involved in a network called the East End Trades Guild. It's very much concerned with the conditions facing small enterprises in central London, but more generally, she's been much involved in Just Space's work in all sorts of ways, not least as an illustrator of the publications and an editor. And finally, Richard Lee. And I haven't set eyes on him yet, but I think he's here. Richard, there you are. Hello, Richard. Give us a wave. Richard Lee, who's the coordinator of Just Space, the spider at the center of its web, as it were. And Richard, you're very welcome. So I'm going to stop at this point and hand over and ask those guests to each say a very short amount to be the basis for a discussion in which then we hope some of the students here will take part by posing questions and so on. If you want to do that, please use the electronic hand to indicate that you'd like to speak. But do also, if you want, use the chat function in Zoom to discuss amongst yourselves or pose questions or raise issues, and we'll have a look at that as we go along. So could I ask Jess to start with the few minutes introduction?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for those wonderful introductions, Michael. So I wanted to draw attention to the fact that central to the new London plan and its strategy is this concept of industrial intensification. And I was intrigued to see it at the center of that Venn diagram there. And I wanted to give it a little bit of a backstory to this. So Just Space was in a subgroup called Just Space Economy and Planning, which I was part of, was involved in a sort of 3 to 5 year long campaign trying to bring the role of industry in London to the fore, to the attention of GLA planners. And we were quite successful in this, and arguing that London does not only have an affordable housing crisis, it also has a workspace crisis. What had been happening over a longish period of time was the gradual erosion of workspace for small and medium enterprises primarily, but also industrial workspace more broadly. And that was mainly through housing and mixed use redevelopment. Between 2001 and 2015, so the period before the preparation of this new London plan, London lost 16% of its industrial capacity, and that was 3 times at least the target of what was planned for in the London plan. So the previous London plan had been planning for a loss of some industrial land due to this process, global process of deindustrialization that was taking place, affecting London. We managed to argue that actually we don't need to lose any more land now, because this sort of deindustrialization process is not the main reason why we've been losing jobs in industry. And in fact, it's sort of property and real estate speculation that has been driving these jobs and workspaces out. So the draft of the plan before it was published included quite a strong policy on what they called the no net loss of industrial land. So the idea was that overall we should not be losing any more industrial land whatsoever. Now that policy came out after a Secretary of State intervention at the last minute before the publication of the London plan. And the focus instead, the Secretary of State argued, had to be on delivery of more housing. So that policy came out. The policy that remained was this policy of industrial intensification. The idea being that we can deliver all the housing we need, and we can secure more additional industrial capacity over time by intensifying the industrial land that we have. And I want to just bring this to your attention because I think it is, it's painted as a sort of win-win solution to the problem that we have. But in fact, I think it's hugely problematic, and delivering housing alongside industry is really, really difficult to do in practice. And what in fact, the risk is that you open the door to further property speculation on the industrial land that we have. Michael, do I have time to just share a map or two?
Yes, do one or two, because I think you're running to 4 minutes. So
okay, I'll very quickly show this map. Right, which just paints the challenge that London has had. So this is the green belt and metropolitan open land. These are the constraints facing London. The next slide shows conservation areas overlaid on top of that. So we can't touch these bits at all. The next slide shows the strategic industrial land. And the final slide overlays the opportunity areas on top of that. And you can immediately see that the opportunity areas match pretty much identically with those swathes of strategic industrial land. So this is being planned. You know, new growth and development is being planned on the strategic industrial land that we have left. So I'm going to finish there. And so that's just a provocation. I think there are huge tensions in the London plan that are not explicit, and we need to understand those. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good. That's great. Well, I think that's extremely clear, and it's a really powerful issue, and we'll see how it goes in the next plan. Okay, could we follow on with Jenny Robinson? Aha. Jenny, is that your slide? I think you may be on mute. Jenny, I can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. Once I put my screen on, I can't see any functionality at all. So thank you so much. And this is the case, the discussion that I will contribute is a great link to what Jess ended up with there, which is that we're looking at opportunity areas, that is areas of intensification of development in London, which in the past would have been perhaps places that really were sites of deindustrialization. But by now, everywhere that can be developed in London effectively has pretty much been developed. And so how do we intensify development is by turning to some of these strategic industrial lands. In Northwest London, the location of HS2 and Crossrail stations opened up a development opportunity in Old Oak Park Royal area. And UCL students, Michael, myself, Richard, Robin Brown, and others from Just Space were quickly alerted to this development through the networks, also with Sharon Haywood from the London Tenants Federation. And students in about 2013, the top left-hand image there, met up with residence groups in that area, which had been targeted for massive development, 60 to 90,000 jobs, 25,000 plus homes, to see how they could try and shape this development and prevent extraordinarily poor impacts on them. So students did a lot of work year by year, also linked to work that UCL students from planning, geography, and other departments had been doing to support the London plan process, with great accolades from, in fact, the London planners themselves and other observers who saw students making good interventions on part of communities. In the Old Oak area, we for years then supported and mentored and enabled community groups meeting, and our research project, Katia Atuya and myself learned so much from this process and developed an analysis alongside this group. One of the things that did happen is that the effort to try and press development from one of the large industrial landowners led to a very legalized local plan process, in which you see the bottom right-hand corner, phalanxes of lawyers attacked each other from all directions, with the end result that the industrial developer withdrew. And so the development is now being squashed into a much smaller area. The local plan has now been approved. One of the things that layers into the intensification of development is how do you pay for it? And basically, London is paying for its development through the developments themselves. So by pushing developments higher, if you look at the buildings at the bottom corners of this slide, by pushing the developments higher, you can get more income from the developers through planning gain or community infrastructure levies, as you see in the graph there. To pay for the infrastructure developments, which are very onerous. So in the Old Oak area, this is £2.5 billion to do the basic infrastructure to enable the development. So in order to pay for that, the mayor himself acknowledged that you'd have to have really an unacceptable level of development in terms of height and scale to extract that value to pay for the development itself. And this is going on all across London. So everywhere you see these super huge towers, take Vauxhall 9 Elms opposite near Pimlico. This is the reason. It's about the state extracting value from the development through these developer contributions. So we faced in Old Oak, in the community networks, this massive avalanche of development. And the analysis of the community groups is that one of the problems, one of the causes of this huge intensified development was that some targets had been set for the area in the London plan, just from a kind of back of the envelope calculation. Somebody looked at the area and said, oh, we could put 25,000 houses there, without seeing actually, can you build that on that land? What kind of a development to come forward? Can we provide the social infrastructure? So we did a lot of work with the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum, with the Grand Union Alliance, the community network there linked to Just Space, and with Just Space to really attack the fact that you could just plonk into the London plan any old number for housing development in an area, with the consequences that this became the overriding plan for that area. So you see here a quote from the Planning Committee of the Old Oak Development Corporation. At the end of this quote here, is if you don't meet those targets, you're not in conformity with the London plan, even though the London plan just made it up. So actually, we really targeted that because it caused a lot of trouble in Old Oak. And we see here section 2.1.1, the quote in the middle, that there was some change in the wording around opportunity areas to insist that the numbers in the London plan were only indicative and needed further work. Unfortunately, this didn't help Old Oak because they just kept on with the same old targets. But perhaps in other areas, that change in wording could really help. So that's one of the things that Just Space is trying to do, is try to collect community concerns and to shape the metropolitan overriding London plan. We tried really hard to shift the priorities in financing developments, which the mayor had set to prioritize. The purple block here is a very important part of the London plan, to take, first of all, from all the income streams from the developers to pay for transport and housing, and social infrastructure and affordable workspace is kind of left by the by, despite the fact that these are very tiny costs. So we really fought on that one in many, many forums, but unfortunately had no effect whatsoever. And the final point is that there was some sort of slight modification of wording on playgrounds, because of course, if you're trying to extract maximum value, who wants to allocate green space to kids? So children are expected to play in the future London on the roofs, in the middle of huge skyscrapers. The ones I showed you in the pictures before were over 50 stories high, being built, in fact, by Imperial College to fund their operations. So we had a little bit of success there by wording. It says that playgrounds should be overlooked to enable passive surveillance, should be integrated into the neighborhoods, which obviously rooftop playgrounds can't be. So this is just to illustrate how engaging collectively across the city with the London plan process and wording can really help to provide a framework in which local demands for developments can be improved. But as we see in engaging with the planning applications in Old Oak, it's very difficult to get that implemented. All the decisions about what developments are going to be like happen behind closed doors, somewhat secretive. So there we're really trying to think now about how do we open up the process of planning applications and decision-making around planning and financing. Okay, Michael, that's it. Thanks.
Jenny, that's wonderful. And that's a masterpiece of compression. Very good. Thank you. 5 or 6 very, very dense minutes. Very good. Thanks a lot. Pablo, can you follow on?
Yes. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can. So probably
can you see the slides change? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to focus on the policies, although I'm not sure if it's a policy or an objective or a recommendation. in the London plan, but is definitely written in the London plan, as it is now, is a literal quote, which is that councils, housing associations, and their partners should always consider alternative option to demolitions first. So this refers to estate regeneration. So in the London plan, part of the narrative supposedly supports state considering alternative options to demolition, but in practice that never happens, or at least the London plan doesn't set mechanisms to how these alternative options are considered and what local authorities and housing associations should do to demonstrate that they've considered alternative options to demolitions. Normally the default option is demolition, and the way also the funding schemes and the guidance is set up, it actually benefits demolition, although the narratives said the opposite. So this is a project that Michael just mentioned, that I've worked in collaboration with Just Space and also with the local campaign of residents, Alton Action, which are residents of the Alton Estate. And in this project, which had a part of knowledge exchange project funded by the Higher Education Innovation Fund, and I also had a part of teaching with students. We work in the Alton Estate, which was built by the London County Council architects in the 50s, and it's a great two-star listed estate, famously appeared in movies and stuff like that. But part of this estate, including tower block that you can see in the picture, is not listed. And this part that is not listed is, I must say now, was planned to be demolished and redeveloped. This was the plan that the former administration of Wandsworth Council, together with the developers Redrow, had for the Alton Estate, which consisted on demolishing everything on the within the red lines and building everything. The developer pulled out of the scheme in August 2020, which is more or less similar date when we started working with residents. Residents contacted us around June, July, and we started actually developing the project with them in September. But the former administration of Wandsworth, they wanted to keep on finding a new development partner. They set up a new tender for finding a new development partner, which is basically a private developer to build a majority of private homes. So we started the residents, the resident-led campaign Alton Action. They contacted me to put together an alternative plan, what they call a people's plan. And a people's plan, my colleague Daniel Fitzpatrick and I have written a little about that, and there's also further research about them. Is basically putting together a community-led alternative to regeneration that is co-produced by residents, and then to present it to the council and try to negotiate with the council. So this is what we've done. We held a total of 9 co-design workshops via Zoom, because it was carried on during the pandemic. It was carried out between September 2020 and September 2021. We had regular meetings with the campaign Alton Action to follow up with the process, almost like weekly meetings with them. We had an online survey where 46 residents participated, also in-depth interviews, and also we collaborated with Alton Action in various activities, organizing an exhibition with them, organizing 2 launches of the state, two launches of the People's Plan, and also in further negotiations we held with the council after we put together the People's Plan. This is how the People's Plans look like, which is basically refurbishing the housing stock and doing a slight densification of the state through infill development, through a very sensitive infill that does not occupy any green space, but mostly occupy kind of like former car park space or abandoned spaces. And the project includes, we work with a quantity surveyor as well to look at the cost of retrofitting the existing homes, and also with another PhD student from the ZIR downstairs at the Bartlett to look at energy efficiency options to retrofit the homes. We propose these new build homes through infill and also through building an additional story to the maisonette blocks, and also bringing diverse social infrastructure and retail spaces and allotments and so on through various interventions. And then we proposed a plan that had a total, so it densified from 288 to 425 homes, of which 53% would be a social rent and 46% would be at market rent. And we worked with the county surveyor to prove that, and that would deliver more social rent homes than Wandsworth plan, without the need of demolishing any home, and also without massively densifying a place that doesn't have access to public transport other than bus.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so that's the final slide.
Good, fine, lovely.
And the final slide is from last night. This is a tweet from the current cabinet member for housing Wandsworth changed from Tory to Labour in May, and last night the housing committee approved scrapping completely the plan of the Alton for demolishing the Alton estate and looking at other options, exploring other options that bring more social homes, and also look at alternative like refurbishment and so on. So I'm just gonna leave here, and also to illustrate the power also that communities participating with residents can also have in influencing change. So I'm just gonna leave it here.
Hey, well, congratulations. That sounds like a fantastic piece of red hot news. Very, very good. Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much,
yeah.
Pablo. That's a good instance, a good example of what can be done, and I'm most grateful. Myfanwy, the fourth of our School of Planning speakers, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Can you hear me, everyone? Great. Thanks so much for including me, and yeah, it's great to have the chance to talk with you all a bit. As Michael said, I did my PhD in UCL, I guess approaching 10 years ago, and it went on for a little while. So I guess what I'm going to do is just offer some brief reflections on one issue within the London plan. Like, my focus has been on the economy, and I guess the question I wanted to raise for you all and lodge for you all was the question of who shapes the economic policies that we see written in the London plan, and in light of that, what can we say about who or what London's economy is for, in terms of the sort of vision for its development that the London plan sort of enacts or advances, let's say. So I think for me, in my experience, debates like metropolitan planning debates around economic issues in London still remain dominated by big businesses, big corporate interests and real estate interests. And one of the issues there is that smaller businesses really struggle to engage in quite technical, lengthy, demanding planning processes, and they don't have the same resources or capacity to hire consultants to represent their interests in these hearings, to do the studies that defend their positions and all the rest. And this is an issue for London because London's economy is in fact very diverse. And small businesses are a really large sector of the economy, especially when you look at employment rather than measures like GVA, let's say. So this underrepresentation of the diversity of London's economy in strategic planning debates is a problem for London, and it's one that Just Space has been working to address for some time. And you see this problem not just in the policies that you see written in the plan, but also in the way the sort of economic evidence that underpins the plan. So evidence obviously is a massive issue in planning. Everything is meant to be evidence-based, but what sort of evidence do we have? And when we look at the economy, we kind of see on the one hand, a real focus on growth, like sectors of the economy that are seen as capable of producing growth, which is perhaps narrowly defined and especially focused again on GVA rather than perhaps measures of sort of a good life or a reasonable living income after basic household expenses and things. But also we see an economic evidence base that's really focused on sort of a view of London's economy that comes from a real estate perspective. So really looking at, you know, the need and potential for commercial development rather than what is going on in the economy, what do we have here, and what are the issues locally that we want to address in terms of economic development. So in that context, I think I really just wanted to alert you to some, I think, really, really important work that Just Space has been engaged with, that Jess alluded to in terms of the formation of an economy and planning subgroup. And I'll put a link in the chat. If anyone's interested in this topic, you can find out more about, over a number of years, a series of events and workshops that were held to kind of knit together the community groups that Just Space had been very successful in mobilizing with, like small business groups. And actually this issue of commercial displacement really came to the fore. And it provided a basis for collaboration and solidarity across small business community and other community groups in London. And I think that's very important, that that mobilization occurred. And what we started to see through that network was how it was able to mobilize a different kind of evidence about what London's economy is and what it could be for and what we want from it. So saying, these economic activities are here, we value them, they provide jobs, they serve migrant and low-income communities, they matter to us, and we don't want them just displaced and demolished. And I think in the mid-2010s, then there started really to be a space of contestation and claim making around, you know, like residents, we want the right to remain. Like residents, we want to retain our buildings, we want to be involved in the future of our area, rather than displaced from it to enable something rather different to come in instead. And I think if you look at the Just Space recovery plan and the community-led plan, you see really like profoundly important propositions for a different future for London's economy. In the community-led plan, it's about a fair, green and diverse economy. And in the recovery plan, this really interesting proposition for a caring city. Let's think of how London could be a caring city, not a global city. And I think obviously as we enter into this period of even more profound chaos and uncertainty, we can look to what Just Space has done for much inspiration. So yeah, I put those links in the chat now.
Yes, please do. That's good. And anybody else who's mentioned documents like Jenny's work with Katya, perhaps we should put the link in the chat for that as well. And then I'll consolidate those into the PDF, which I'll put online on Monday. That's great, Myfanwy. Thank you so much. Last of our wonderful panel of punctual not last but one, Lucy Rogers, and then Richard Lee, and then we can go into general discussion pretty much on time. Lucy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm from the East End. Just Space is comprised of small organisations, not individuals, and I'm part of the East End Trades Guilds, which is an alliance of small businesses in East London. I'm also an artist. I illustrated my illustrations were used in the community plan. This is the document, which you'll hopefully see a hard copy of, and there's also the recovery plan. We decided that our illustrations would make our document look different from any kind of government official publication. Anyway, one of the issues Just Space has been tackling in the London plan, and it's been mentioned throughout this, is the opportunity areas. From the start, we've been questioning the way these areas are drawn up and the lack of accountability in them. They're unique to the London plan, and they're unique to the power of the mayor. They're drawn up with a red line around an area, usually in tandem with the boroughs, and inside are assigned housing and jobs basically. And in practice, this means that the big developers get fast-tracked, they get to build more of what they want. In practice also, we see less family housing, a lot less, if any, social housing, less green space, and everything at a bigger scale. And the East End Trades Guild, for example, battled against the development in Bishopsgate Goods Yard near Brick Lane. This had the disadvantage of being inside one of the opportunity areas, which is a giant area now, which was expanded from, quotes, the city fringe to include an area stretching up from Hackney all the way down to Aldgate. So it's a giant area. We see prices going up, obviously, around the borders of the areas as well as within them. And it's really about speculation. Once an opportunity area is proposed, land speculation starts. And we're hearing from our government that their economic policy is all about growth. But of course, that's an incredibly general word, isn't it? It's not growth for whom and growth at whose expense. And they want to, as part of this, draw up zones rather similar to the opportunity areas called investment zones across Britain, inside which there will be reduced planning restrictions, tax cuts, reduced regulation. But what we can see after 20 years of looking at the opportunity areas is, as you've heard, growth for some, but loss for others. And so, we are very worried about these national plans as well, because we think that the opportunity areas demonstrate that. And above all, the unaccountability of the opportunity areas and no monitoring for them, no monitoring of them. So the second issue, a big issue for Just Space, is we want a statement of community involvement, as it's known, for the mayor, for the London plan, to be embedded in the London plan. All other boroughs have these things. They set out how a borough will consult with residents and what duties the borough has towards residents. And we want the mayor to sign up to something to make proper guarantees of consultation, and to demand this also of the boroughs when the boroughs fall short. But this consultation, it must be remembered, is not just for the sake of it, not just to be heard and then go home. What's needed is for people to have a say about their existing places where they live, so that when an area is developed, we can protect and acknowledge first, and then protect those things that have value. This may be social housing, community buildings, markets, street markets, low-cost workspace, which has all been mentioned. And of course, remember that a community has expert knowledge. So we want there to be a community audit embedded in this as well. Because we see that these agendas for big scale growth do sweep these things away. So we want really meaningful engagement with all parts of the communities and recognition of all the voices to be heard. In our community, in our recovery plan, this was a central part of the recovery plan, for recognition and being heard by minority ethnic groups, very particularly, and so they can reveal important hidden issues which need to be understood by planners before they make their plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. That's great. Thank you. Finally, Richard Lee, can we ask you to take the floor, Richard, and then we'll go into general questions and discussion.
Thank you, Michael, and hello to everyone. I'm also here as a community member. I play a coordinating role in Just Space, and I'm also a community activist in the London Borough of Southwark, where I live. I'd like to share with you something a bit different, perhaps, to the issues around local economy and bottom-up planning in economic terms, but really to emphasize the social dimension of planning. We feel in Just Space that this is a very undeveloped part of London planning. And yet really when you think about what should be the purpose of planning, to actually make the city better for its citizens and to look after our well-being, then really the social dimension should be very critical to any planning deliberations. To help us take this forward, we had an opportunity just a few weeks ago to present our ideas to the GLA, to the London Assembly Planning Committee. And if you have a look at the Just Space website that Michael indicated earlier, you'll see on the home page that we give a full report and summary of the ideas that we presented on September the 7th to that planning committee. And I would just very quickly now just like to give you some snapshots of some of the issues that the community speakers presented to the GLA on that day. We had Florence, representing a care workers cooperative, who spoke about the need for what she called local care hubs. That is spaces at a neighbourhood or local level where care workers, care providers, those needing care can actually find resources and can meet and gather, link up with other institutions in the area, and thereby actually start to really change the environment around care workers and how they're valued by society. So Florence was making the case that planning has a really important role to play in actually addressing things like wages and terms and conditions of care workers and the services they provide to people. It is a planning issue. Saif spoke about the Save Brick Lane campaign in Tower Hamlets, and he spoke as an active member of the Bengali community about how the expansion of London in the ways that Lucy's just described has had such a negative impact on local community services, on local retail, on local food markets within the Brick Lane area. And Saif made the point that planning should give a value and recognition to what he calls cultural heritage, and to actually see heritage in a much broader and more diverse way than it does currently. Portia spoke from the Renters' Rights London about the difficulties for private renters about having their voice heard in planning and housing decisions. And she too felt that having community spaces where private renters and others are able to meet, share experiences, actually work out how collectively they can make their case and put forward ideas to the planning authorities, that these local spaces were just so fundamental, and that in addition to those, there needed to be the resources available in terms of, if you like, training and consultancy support and advice, if the citizens, in this case private renters, are actually to have any chance of being effective in influencing planning. Yasmin, a Somali youth worker, made a very passionate case about young people's experience of planning, and she proposed ideas around how the system could change in order to open up space for young people to actually have their voice and for their perspectives to actually come forward when planning decisions, planning policy is being addressed. And then finally, Christine from a London-wide equality network called HEAR, H-E-A-R, spoke about the issue of digital exclusion and how under COVID and then following on from that, so much has moved online, and many people actually find that's very difficult. Yes, some gain a benefit, but there's also very many who don't. And Christine gave many examples of difficulties arising from that, and really linked it up to the issue of local spaces. So if your library closes and actually you rely on the library to access digitally, then actually this has quite a wide implication for you. So these are just snapshots, and you can read more about them and how the London Assembly responded by looking on the Just Space website. Finally, I'd just like to say that Just Space does really value our collaboration with students at the Bartlett School of Planning and with academics too. And we really need the kinds of resources that you have and your planning knowledge to actually enable community groups across London to be more effective in influencing planning. And Pablo and myself and some others, during October, we will be setting up some introduction sessions to how you can help Just Space with particular projects. So please look out for that invitation, and we'd really enjoy and really welcome as many of you as possible to work with Just Space during the coming year.
Michael, you're muted.
Yes, we've still got 25 minutes of time for questions and discussion, and I guess we could slightly overrun if people want to. There's a very interesting question has appeared in the chat. Robert Hunt is asking. Robert, do you want to put your camera on and your microphone and ask it live, and we'll see what we can do with it? Because I don't see that anybody's put their hand up as an electronic hand yet. Oh, Robert says it's difficult for him. He's in the library, so he can't talk to us. Well, can I read out what Robert Hunt writes? It's really our first question. He says, the latest London plan has significantly increased housing targets for each of the London boroughs. How realistic do you think these targets are for delivery? Can Just Space advise on best practice for involving the community to shape plans and avoid NIMBYism from local residents? So who would like to have a go at that question? Jenny, do you want to make a comment? Because you've written a comment in the chat, you might want to make it orally.
Well, just very quickly, I think my experience of many of the community groups Just Space works with is that NIMBYism is not their concern, but rather how to make a much better city for all of us going forward. So I put a reference to one of our papers you can download there. But I think also one of the challenges is how do you take policies into actual developments? And the key thing here is the negotiation of each particular planning application and each particular development to make sure that it's the best possible. So can we expand the space for democratic engagement in planning process at that moment of the planning applications, which are currently very secretively dealt with? And the second thing is, how could we encourage a restructuring of financing, that it's not that each development must pay for itself, which really intensifies everything, as Lucy was saying, in relation to opportunity areas everywhere, but perhaps to assemble the finances across the city to be able to be more strategic, to invest also in low value land, which is currently undevelopable. It's ridiculous. So there's really a big structural change that's needed. And our comparative project, which looks at Johannesburg and Shanghai, shows some alternative ways you could cut those things. So yeah, but Lucy had her hand up there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the NIM, when anyone complains about a coming planning application, they can often just be called a NIMBY. Just, it's a very lazy term. What people in London are always saying is that, okay, build the thing, but build the right amount of social housing, social rented housing. That's what we want. That's what's needed. And so if the whole block 50 stories high was filled with that, that would be a completely different matter. I know that's a silly idea. However, the NIMBY label is extremely lazy, and anyone who uses it is being very lazy, we think, and we want to concentrate on the kind of housing, not the numbers.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yes, we've got a question from Lewis Pender. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Everyone, thank you for the talk. I think my question relates to the levelling up and regeneration bill. Just thought it's quite an open-winded question, it's for the whole panel. But do you think it goes far enough in sort of, you know, changing the way the planning system is at the moment, sort of the benefits of it, the constraints in terms of London especially? So, yeah, it's quite open-winded, but yeah.
Well, it's a question to the whole panel. I don't know whether everybody wants to answer it, but who would like to have a go? Who is au fait with the government's levelling up and planning bill? This is two separate ideas in government which have somehow been cut and pasted together to make a single parliamentary bill, which is going through the English Parliament at the moment, but it's not quite clear what's going to happen because we just got a new Prime Minister a week or so ago, and she may have different priorities and this whole thing may change. So I don't know who would like to make a comment.
I would like to, if it's okay, I would like to make a point that the whole way of travel is to deregulate and to dismantle actual planning rules. And we never believe that that's a good thing, because the rules are there for a reason and they're protecting certain things. So that taking out the rules doesn't actually work. And developers actually think that too. They'd prefer a more a system that was more that was more secure, that was more certain for them. And the thing about levelling up, I think, is that I think many people think London and the north, but actually within London, of course, levelling up needs to happen. That's really what we are talking about. The great disparities within London is something that sort of wider MPs may not think about, but we want to bring that to their attention within if we have a voice on this bill. Or the bill that is to come. As Michael says, it's very uncertain.
Any other comments on that?
I might just add that in terms of this sort of London versus the north or London versus the rest, London's always been seen as the economic sort of powerhouse for the country, and for many years it was argued that if London grows, the rest of the country will benefit. Obviously, it's very clear that hasn't happened. But I don't think any of the sort of levelling up policies, bills coming through Parliament really challenge that at all. And for London, it's the growth agenda is a problem for precisely the reasons that Lucy was highlighting there, in terms of the driving inequality within London. So it's problematic both for the country, but also for Londoners. I'll just leave it there.
And just to add to that, it's quite interesting in London, the fact that the inequalities also goes very fine grain. For example, I've been working, I was working last year with the students from my module Civic Design with communities in Church Street in Westminster. And you can see the lack of investment in an area in a local authority that is one of the richest local authorities in the country, and it still has areas with very little investment. And the same happens with Kensington and Chelsea, that had areas which are with very, very kind of like little investment. So it goes kind of like really fine grain, and it's also up to other levels of political decision. Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. I've just seen that I'm now host. Michael's had to leave. So thank you to Michael. Laurie, you have a question. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. Thank you for your presentations. I'll just lower the hand. So my question's about the alternate action thing, and it's great news that the old plan was scrapped. So I'm just thinking about how easy is it, or what's the process whereby the new plan, or like a people's plan, can be accepted or taken on by or adopted by the local authority?
So that's a very good question, and something that I forgot to mention because of the time. The people's plan objectives is not to fully be adopted as a plan, because it hasn't been produced through the planning system, but it has been more informally produced by residents. The main objective of the people's plan is to influence a plan that ultimately will be delivered by the local authority with residents' participation and so on, hopefully. But the objective is not to deliver the people's plan as it is, but to produce a resident's vision that the local authority can consider. And so far, the first steps are that they have scrapped the previous plans. They've read the people's plan, so the regeneration team has their people's plan, and they'll be now what they've published is that they will be asking kind of like external professionals and also their own team to evaluate different proposals, including proposals included in the people's plan, such as refurbishment and infill and so on, and also proposals from the other plan and other proposals. So I guess it's not. I think that the interesting part about Wandsworth is that there was a political change from Conservative to Labour, and at the same time, by the time the political change happened, the residents were ready with a community vision, which helps to bring a proposal to the council. Say, okay, here's a proposal, something that can be considered and looked at by the council. So it's very important to, sometimes if this political change didn't happen, things would be much more difficult, but it's important to be ready with proposals, with counter proposals for when this political change takes place. And also because, we've seen in other local authorities, such as Newham or Haringey, many of these many of these kind of like grassroots campaign, at the end of the day, they also play a role on political changes that might take place at the council level, because they build pressure. I think that's something that maybe Myfanwy can tell also a little bit more about what happened in Haringey, that also there was kind of like a bit of a change within the government that was also influenced by different campaigns.
Would you like me to comment on that a little, Jess? I don't know.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really important question that, what happens with the plan, or what's the purpose of the plan? And I think, so I live in Haringey, and I've become quite involved in this community plan over Ward's Corner and Seven Sisters Market. So I think where a site becomes contested, i.e. there is a plan or a development proposal that is being pursued against the wishes of the residents and the local community more broadly, and you perhaps enter into a conflict situation, then groups often use like really quite a wide variety of tools and strategies and tactics to try to influence and gain greater control over the situation, if they feel very strongly attached to the area, it's their area. It's not really a NIMBY thing. It's more like, well, we want to stay here and we want to be a part of this. So, a community plan, producing your own plan when, you're being faced with a plan that's produced and coming from somewhere else is a really important strategy. And I think in Haringey, there's been a 20-year struggle really over a plan to demolish Seven Sisters Market. It's also called, often known as Latin Village, which sits within a historic building in a city block with lots of businesses serving migrant and minoritized communities in Tottenham, South Tottenham. That was really very strongly opposed. And, at the heart of the campaign against demolition was the production of a community plan. And then, as, Pablo said, the developer did in the end go away because it was not financially viable for them to proceed with their plan. There was an opening then for the community plan. And, I think it's been a very long-term, careful effort to prepare for that moment and to be ready for that moment. And, there's a still ongoing process there where the building owner is committed to letting groups linked to market traders come forward in like a first closed bidding process for a long lease of the site. So there's an opening there to deliver on the ambitions of the community plan, but also then a changing relationship with the council that I think increasingly recognises the legitimacy, the authority, the knowledge of the traders and the community that has worked so hard for so long towards these goals. So, but, on the road to implementation, many other things are achieved and won and fought and lost. So, it's not just, oh, did you succeed? Did you get the policy change? Or you learn a lot in the process, and groups build power and capacity and, may gain all sorts of other things as well in the process of preparing their plan that makes them much better placed to sort of navigate the process of change that come, I think.
Thank you very much, Myfanwy. So there are no other hands up, but there are a couple of questions in the chat. The first was, I don't know, Kirti, if you would like to pose your question, or if you'd like me to just read it out. I will read it out. So the question was, what role can policymakers play in terms of monitoring and efficiency in the planning process? I think let's just focus on the monitoring and evaluation of policies. Jenny, you made a response there. I wonder if you could just elaborate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the next question goes in the other direction, which I don't know whether Richard or Lucy want to respond to that, which is how can small businesses and community groups influence these decision making? But the question about policymakers, can they do something? And I think they could at least do their jobs properly, So if you make a S106 or planning gain agreement to say re-provided church, which was agreed in Old Oak, this was not monitored by the planners until it came to a crisis and the church was being evicted. And we had to make a petition and campaign and bring in the MP and lobby the mayor. So actually just enforcing the policies that are there could be good, and also using discretion to encourage community provision. The planners do have discretion to respond to the campaigns and mobilizations and comments of community groups around plans, and they could take that weight of interest and concern and public outcry and do something about it and change a policy. But my question in the chat there is, does the mayor allow them to do that? So the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation is a mayoral development corporation, and I think it's him who wants to meet his housing targets, which are absolute numbers, who wants to secure an income stream to provide transport infrastructure. So to what extent do the planners have a discretion in the system? I'd be very interested in what the planning school academics think about that. But the other side of the question, which is the next one, I think is really interesting. How can communities make an impact on these processes?
I'll just offer something on the planning side, and then maybe ask Richard to comment as well. So planning is quite siloed when you get to the local authority as an institution, you know, policymakers will work in a little team, and they'll almost exclusively be working on the evidence base feeding into policy and making the policies. And then there'll be an enforcement team, and then there'll be another team dealing with planning applications as they come in. And these really are very siloed, and there's not a lot of joining up. And then you've got, at the London level, you've got the other issue that the London Plan team and the GLA generally entirely rely on data coming from the local authorities in order to monitor their own London Plan policies, really. And so, yeah, so it depends on the quality of the data coming through as to whether or not they're able to monitor their own policies effectively as well. So there are lots of challenges there. In terms of the, you know, influencing developments and planning applications as they come through, the direction of travel at a national level in terms of planning policy reform is to try and focus most of the consultation at the plan making stage and almost eradicate it completely from the planning application stage. And that's a real problem, because a lot of communities only really get knowledge of what's going on when the planning application is submitted. I don't know, Richard, if you wanted to say anything.
Well, Jess, I'd really debate what you've just said, because I think the actual problem with the system is that communities aren't sufficiently involved at all in plan making, and therefore when they get involved in objecting to a planning application, it becomes very reactive, and then we have these slurs like "you're just NIMBYs." Yeah. Whereas actually we shouldn't, the system shouldn't be based around, well, communities get some kind of consultation on a planning application, and then generally speaking they'll go through, of course, and the community just feels so frustrated and angry about it. I think actually we do need far more involvement at earlier stages, particularly at plan making. And I think within the plan making, you should actually, as a planning authority, be scoping out plans for major developments. You should be proposing site allocations. So actually, you're foreseeing planning applications which are going to come forward later in the process. So I actually, if only the government would do this in a serious manner, I think it would be a very good thing to actually front load community involvement within the plan making system. And for students that are interested within the 2 community plans that Just Space has produced so far, so we did one in 2016 as well as this year's recovery plan, we have specific chapters on the issue of community participation in planning, and we set out a large number of tools and proposals. The buzzword for us at the moment is around co-production. And you can read about our thoughts on co-production in the recovery plan. And there's not time now for me to go through the list, but we've got about a dozen specific proposals about how could a co-produced plan actually work in practice. What's needed from the planning authority and the Mayor of London side to actually achieve serious co-production from citizens and businesses, etc., in that preparation. So I think we have lots of ideas on it as a community, and we're looking for institutions, and that includes universities, to pick up on our ideas. You know, we're, as Lucy said, actually, we're not NIMBY-ish, we're actually very creative, and we have loads of ideas about doing things better, and we're looking for partners to work with us. And I think just finally, in terms of the question, can you actually make a change and what's needed? Well, I think Pablo proves the point really on what he said, doesn't he? You know, communities producing their own vision for their area can actually be extremely effective. And we need the university to do more work in that area at the visioning stage, not at planning application stage.
Thank you, Richard. I don't disagree with you at all, but I think think the issue is that there's a lot of rhetoric around front loading and no resourcing really going into it. And I don't think the government is actually really serious about it. And I think it's a way of, in a sense, squeezing the planning application process, making the consultation much shorter and less, more pressurized at that stage, and not really doing anything on the plan making side that's significant or well resourced. And so that's my concern, that actually we're squeezing out public participation, and that seems to be the direction of travel from the government's perspective. Jennifer.
Yeah, just quickly share our experience in the Old Oak Park Royal was that there was a huge amount of openness about developing the early plan proposals and community engagement and ideas, and Sharon Hayward of the London Tenants Federation really supported that articulation of community needs, and there was a lot of responsiveness at that moment. The difficulty we found, and I'd be interested in Richard's thoughts on this, is that when the plan comes out, the formal plan, it says developers will be encouraged to. Proposals will be welcomed, which can, subject to there being enough money or viability and so on. So, how can you develop a plan that is something that can be used more forcefully in the development process? So that's one sort of question is what are the plans saying and doing? If all they're saying is we'd love it if developers would build a park if they could, perhaps on the roof, maybe, it's not a very strong plan.
Yeah, so just quickly, if a plan was genuinely co-produced with all citizens, then actually you wouldn't have these kind of ridiculous tools within the plan and mechanisms that are totally lopsided and are so much in favour of developer interests. If we were co-producing a plan, we would actually be putting in lots of different tools and mechanisms. That's my point, really. And we shouldn't be satisfied just with, as you're suggesting, it's not enough to just put forward policies in plan making. The question of implementation and monitoring is critical. And we need to be supported at a community level to actually make sure that we get those issues in plan making too.
I can see that Michael's rejoined us from the hospital.
Yes, but I'm on mute, and you carry on. I may be taken away at any moment.
That's great. Eleanor, would you like to just elaborate on your point?
Yeah, I think my face might be showing up or not. Sorry, I'm using two screens and I'm about to shoot off as well to the shard of all planning development. No, the comment I made is that you probably need to co-produce a planning system, because I agree with what Jennifer Robinson was saying. Even if you produce a co-produced plan, the current planning system, the current planning regulations do not allow to insert those strong and more kind of forcing processes that implement what the plan actually says. At the moment, we don't have a planning system that allows us to do this. It's a discretionary planning system. Is largely based on conversations that happen elsewhere. And I worry that even setting up a plan that is co-produced, as some neighborhood plans are. Neighborhood plans are, in theory, co-produced, and yet they are incredibly weak in terms of then directing development. So maybe, yes, maybe it's worth thinking about co-producing a planning system. Maybe provocative, but sorry about the lack of face.
Eleanor. No problem at all. So I think, given it is just past 12 and the questions seem to have stopped, I think we will draw this session to a close, I really want to, first of all, thank everybody for coming, because it's wonderful to have such a big audience. But of course, to thank Michael, he's now gone again, I think, for organising this session, for the wonderful presentation on the London Plan and Just Spaces work to begin with, and to our panellists, Myfanwy, Richard, Jenny, Pablo, who's just left, and Lucy. I hope I haven't missed anyone out. So yeah, big thank you. This Zoom recording will be made available, and I think Michael will be organising that. So if you missed the earlier part of the presentation, you can go back to it. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.